Good question. This must have been in maybe middle school or high school. So I was already probably a teenager, close to it. Did a lot of activities together. We did tennis, we did basketball, we did swimming. I did swim team one summer, all with this same group.
Some people play it safe. Definitely not Stacey. From crunching numbers to leading global teams to launching her own powerhouse business consulting firm, she's mastered the art of strategy, business, and getting things done. With a career spanning continents from Houston to London to Singapore, she knows how to take giant leaps and how to land on her own feet. And beyond the boardrooms, she's an active volunteer because she knows it's not about climbing higher, it's about lifting others. A loving wife, a wonderful mother, and a mentor to so many university students. Please welcome Stacey. Welcome Stacey to Realizing.
Thank you for the lovely introduction.
You're most welcome, Stacey. You're such an inspiring person for us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So take us through your childhood. How did it all start? Were there signs in your childhood that you're going to be this groundbreaking person one day?
Well, thank you for the compliment. I was actually very shy as a child. And I think it took me a long time to even reach out to people to get help for things. I was told by a teacher once that, I would be able to do great things once I came out of my shell. And I think that was very much the case. I was in a shell for years and years. I did very well academically. And I do have a distinct memory of, doing well on a test once, probably back in 4th grade or something, and deciding, okay, I'm gonna do well at this. So I always did well academically. I did put myself out there at times. I did a musical theater course where I had to sing solo performances, which, I feel bad for the people who had to listen to that. But I do love music. But for the most part, I didn't really get involved in much other than a couple of sports. I was just very shy. I didn't like to speak out too much.
So you mentioned that this teacher asked you to come out of your shell. When was this? Which grade was this?
Good question. This must have been in maybe middle school or high school. So I was already probably a teenager, close to it.
Right.
I think year by year, I have to say, I gradually, I found a great group of friends. We did a lot of activities together. We did tennis, we did basketball, we did swimming. I did swim team one summer, all with this same group. But I didn't venture much out beyond that. And this teacher, I think it was my math teacher. She just tried to push me, but very gently. But at the time, again, I didn't have any desire to do much more at that time, I would say. I was very focused on the social aspect, on my friends. I did do well in school, but that probably wasn't my primary focus either.
So can we say that, of course, you were good in academics?
Yeah.
And then you had a huge social circle?
Yeah.
And then also you were doing a lot of sports?
Yeah, a few sports, yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think the sports taught you?
The sports taught me a lot that has still stuck with me, especially tennis, which I think is very much a mental sport. I played doubles initially and worked my way up to singles my junior year. And I just remember losing every game my first year playing singles. And I absolutely hated it because they would announce it over the loudspeaker in the mornings. Oh, the girls' tennis team, here are the results. And I had one friend in particular who would always go, oh, you lost again. And I was just like, oh, just leave me alone. But the year after that, it was the reverse. I started winning everything. I think my head was in a different place. Whereas I was very frustrated the first year I played singles, doing a kind of McEnroe, throwing my racket and getting generally very angry. The second year, I was just calm, collected, and I could play properly, just relax. And I think, it's true of many things in life. It's all about your perception of things and how you approach things. I actually I still find tennis very challenging. I play in the league here.
Right.
I just picked it up again last year.
Wonderful.
I started playing initially socially with one of my friends who's really into it, and then I decided to try playing singles in the league.
Right.
And they assessed me right at the bottom, and that was very hard for me because, I still had this idea of me being good at tennis from 25 years ago or whenever. Right. So it was very humbling, and actually playing the games took a lot of mental skill or, just mental discipline. I started out losing everything, but eventually I kind of got over it and won some games. I think, and it was something that I really had to work at, which, I find business to be a lot easier actually for me. Like things that are academic, business kind of networking, that to me comes a lot easier. I think sports are where I really challenge myself and take myself out of my comfort zone.
Right. So I have two questions from this, Stacey, because there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot packed in this small answer. But one is, you mentioned that your mindset changed from how you were first getting frustrated and angry with how you were playing, and then you became much more calmer.
Yeah.
And, because you were also succeeding, you were becoming better in your sport. So do you think your mindset was changing because you were succeeding, or because you changed your mindset, that's why you started succeeding? So what's the correlation between the two?
I think it's a combination, to be honest. I mean, once you start seeing results, and this applies to anything, you can kind of, take a deep breath and approach it with more confidence. Yeah. But I watched a lot of videos, from sports psychiatrists, because for me, I was like, why is this getting to me so much? And I think it's very much a tennis thing, because tennis was always a high pressure sport for me. Whereas, I do other things and I don't put the pressure on myself. I play pickleball now. Right. I've done the Spartan competition, things like that. I'm not putting that kind of pressure.
Right.
I think a lot of it is the pressure that I put on myself.
Right.
And for some reason, it wasn't, I put a lot of pressure on myself with work actually as well, but I seem to deal with that better.
Yeah.
So I went down this rabbit hole of just trying to figure out, what is it? And all I could conclude is that it just takes, you have to just keep doing it.
Right.
So I wasn't used to gameplay.
Yeah.
Thankfully, the people I play socially with, they all play in leagues. A lot of them play almost every day of the week.
Right.
So they always play in a game format instead of just going around and hitting.
Right.
And I think the more you do that, the more you can get used to it and get comfortable with it.
Right. Yes. And the second question that I wanted to ask from there was, which you answered a bit in the follow-up, is that, are you so competitive? Because you said that, starting from the bottom of the table, you did not like it when you started to play again.
I'm still towards the bottom.
Yeah. So, because you're playing with people who are playing in the league, isn't it? So I think that's the reason, because otherwise you're very good.
Wow.
Very good. So are you always very competitive?
I would like to say no, but I actually am quite a competitive person. I think, you know, I wouldn't say I've been called ambitious in my career. I remember at one company I was working for, we had this 365 feedback, and the feedback was, she's too ambitious, she's this and that. And I was like, wow, this is really not me. And I do, as an aside, think some of that is the way women are perceived in business. But I think, I'm never kind of ambitious in that way, but competitive, yes. So I do compare myself to people. I try not to, but it's something in my nature, I guess. Yeah. I like to do well. Yeah. Yeah, I am competitive.
Yeah, so I think that's worked for you, right? Do you think being competitive is important if you want to reach places?
Not necessarily. I think people reach places for all different reasons. I think competitiveness can help push things along, but it's not necessary. And, I don't really let it take over as my primary driver, because I think it can be quite negative. It can hold people back as well. Right. Like in the example of, putting so much pressure on yourself that, right, you can't perform.
Right.
So I think competitiveness, yeah, I guess overall, I would say it's not necessary.
Right. Okay, so now we go back to where you were growing up, and you were in which city?
Growing up, I was in New Jersey, right, close to New Brunswick, where Rutgers University is.
Right. So take us through your typical day. What did it look like? What were you doing in your high school? And how did you decide to become an engineer?
Okay, so in high school, I was playing a lot of tennis. I was on the tennis team. That was my main sport. I also played the violin. And I was out with friends every night. I think I was very influenced more than any adult in my life by my group of friends, for better or for worse. We would go, once we could drive, we were always in New Brunswick, hanging out at Rutgers, sometimes going down to Princeton, or, just hanging out at people's houses. I think I didn't like spending time alone at that point in my life. I was more all about being with friends.
Right, right. And what do you think it taught you, being so social?
God, I made a lot of mistakes. I think, not having I had obviously a very good relationship with my parents. But with teachers, I never had a really close relationship with any of my teachers. I think looking back, I probably could have benefited from having a closer, more influence from adults at that point in my life. But I had a great time. I mean, I had so much fun in high school. I had even more fun in college. So, I think it's all a balance, really.
Yeah. Yeah. So then how did you choose to go towards engineering?
So engineering, I was always very interested in science and math. And engineering seemed to be something that, there's so many disciplines of engineering. I liked medicine. So actually, I originally thought I was going to become a doctor.
Right.
And I chose Duke because I had never even heard of Duke before, actually. Somehow I'd missed the whole college basketball scene.
Right.
But they had biomedical engineering, so that's really what attracted me to Duke.
Right.
And I initially enrolled as pre-med, doing biomedical engineering. I was actually not so set on the engineering. Now that I think back, I wanted to do arts, which my parents were not too keen on.
Right.
I think they were not keen on paying so much money for an arts degree.
Right.
But my idea was that I could start out. So I did a Duke program in arts for my first semester. It was called the Focus program, which they still have, but they have, it's kind of more focused disciplines now.
Right.
But at the time when I went, it was art, and you could choose to do theater, English, or music. I think you chose 2 of them. And they were small seminar classes, so it gave you the opportunity to really get to know the professors quite well, as opposed to the usual freshman experience, which is, you know, these giant lecture halls.
Right.
So it really, I thought I was going to go to Duke, stick with the pre-med, but then change my major from engineering to maybe art history.
Wow.
But the arts actually I found so difficult. I really enjoyed them, and those classes stuck with me more than anything else. I mean, my music class was amazing. We went to a Baptist church. We went to, you know, I think we went to some kind of orchestra performance. The art class, we went to like a little pottery workshop. So we got to do a lot of things in this small group that were just, I did a paper on Tori Amos. It was just a very interesting experience, but I was working really, really hard. So I was pulling all-nighters, writing poetry.
Right.
And a lot of people in the program, you know, were just very naturally talented.
Right.
And, you know, they would just be able to write something in 5 minutes that I couldn't do in hours and hours.
Right.
And on the, you know, the second semester when I started my engineering classes, those were so easy for me. I had time to go out and do other things. And I realized, okay, I think, you know, my talents just lie in numbers, really. I'm good with numbers. So I ended up sticking with that and dropping the pre-med, actually, because the pre-med, I felt there was such a contrast to the type of people who are doing pre-med versus engineering. The pre-med was full of talking about competitive people. It was very, very competitive. You know, there were stories about people going to the library and ripping pages out of books so that, you know, other people couldn't study them.
Oh my goodness.
I don't know if that was actually true. I have some lovely friends who did pre-med.
Yeah.
My own sister is a doctor. But it was just a lot of studying, you know, studying a month before exams. And the engineers, we were all kind of, you know, more in it together. We would, the night before an assignment was due, we would all be staying late in the engineering building, working together, cramming the night before exams. It was just much more my style, and I enjoyed that a lot more.
So what I'm seeing already is, even in college, you had this streak of multiple interests. So you have interest in history, art, English literature, poetry, music, of course engineering and medicine.
Yeah.
So I think you touching upon almost all the fields, right? So,
Yeah.
do you think that the seeds for consultancy were sown at that time when you found your interests?
At that time, I was really just exploring all kinds of things. To be honest, being a consultant was quite far from my mind, and a lot of the engineers ended up graduating and going into law or consulting or investment banking.
Yeah.
And I remember at the time thinking, oh, they're all selling their souls, you know, I'm going to stick with engineering. So I really was just more interested in, you know, working on like, you know, interesting research work, lab work. That's really what I would have seen myself doing. I wanted to do a PhD in electrical engineering. That was really how I saw things going at that point in time.
Right. Another thing I notice is that you always like to work in collaboration. You want to have people around you and work in teams.
Yeah, I've always been I think it's a bit of a mix, actually. I do like doing a lot of things on my own, too. I like, you know, kind of figuring stuff out, just sitting down somewhere quiet. But working, yeah, I mean, I like being around people. I've always been, even though I was shy, very shy as a child, I think year by year I became, more opened up a bit, and just, being around people, meeting all different types of people was what really kind of inspired me.
Right. So now, what are the skills that you think you learned in college, which you're still using today, or maybe the kind of mindset it gave you that has helped you to reach where you are?
Yeah, I think the collaboration, working together with people to a deadline, it just, it really, it makes me feel quite fulfilled now. I love working with teams. I do a lot of work on my own, but by far I'm happiest when I'm kind of tackling a problem with a team at a client. And I think engineering, I still approach a lot of things as an engineer. So I like to, I see things as problems that, you can kind of create something to solve this problem. I think that kind of approach to things never leaves you.
Never.
And I just love working with other engineers. Well, most of the people I work with are no longer in engineering, but I find that I really get on with engineers. We're all a bit nerdy. Not everybody. I don't want to, say broad generalizations about engineers, but we're all, a lot of us are a bit nerdy, a bit disorganized. So it was quite tough for me actually at KPMG, having to put stuff in folders, working in audit, and everything is organized and numbered. I was the one with like just papers everywhere, but I knew where everything was in my mess.
Yeah.
But I had to become more disciplined to really do things in a more structured way.
We're all working with organized chaos.
Yes, exactly.
Correct. So now we are in which year? You're passing out of your engineering course. We are in which?
Yeah, so I graduated from Duke in 2002, and then I moved to London.
Right.
So I had done a term abroad while I was at Duke in my junior year, and that's what really changed my direction, because I fell in love with London. I met a guy there, wanted to move back to be with him. So I moved back I applied to do a master's. So I ended up doing my master's at UCL in biochemical engineering.
Right.
Which is more like pharmaceuticals, the drug design.
So I still see a lot of intermarriage of different disciplines.
Yeah. I think, all sort of connect. The engineering courses degrees that I did are all connected, but different disciplines.
Right.
So that really changed my path, because one of the things I liked about the course in London is that they required us to learn about business. They made us do a course where we learned how to prepare a business plan. So we had to do a project where we were commercializing some sort of technology, put together the business plan for it, and then pitch to investors.
Right.
And I found that quite interesting in a way that, a way into the business world, really. I did initially want to stay with engineering, but I wanted to stay in London more. And at the time, if you were a graduate with, just internships were my only practical work experience. You couldn't really get a work permit in an engineering job. I remember I looked at I think IBM, and, a lot of the companies said for their graduate program, don't apply if you need a work permit.
Yeah.
So my options were really investment banking or accounting. So going back to what I previously thought was selling my soul,
right,
that's what I ended up doing. So KPMG I thought was a bit more interesting, because they had, at the time it was called the Information Risk Management
right,
Department.
Right.
And I may have had a bit of a misconception about it, but I thought it was, full of hackers and it was very exciting. In actuality, it was a lot of audit work, but they were also trying to build up the consulting work at the time. And we were eventually, the name was changed to IT advisory.
Right.
So so that was really how the transition happened. And actually, in between, I had done a lot more work on the business planning. So I was on a Chevening Technology Enterprise Scholar, which is a government sponsored scholarship. And
Right.
it was basically for people with advanced degrees to work on projects that involved commercialization of technology. It was in the early days of incubators, of spinning out companies from universities.
Right.
So I worked on a project, which was kind of an assay type project, but I had a job. Actually, I forgot this was paid. I was working on a software that would basically help academics who had no idea about business but had an idea that they could commercialize. It would take them through the steps of creating a business plan and how to pitch it. And I was meeting with all the different, or not all of them, but several of the UK universities that were leading in terms of spinning out companies to see how they were doing it, what the process was.
Right.
So it was quite interesting, and I think it did get me more interested in maybe going beyond engineering in terms of a career and into business.
Right.
But I will not lie, the main driver was work permit and being able to stay in London.
Yes, we all love London. So
yes.
That's fine. So what do you think, Stacey, when you moved from engineering to consulting? What is the mindset shift that you needed to have? Did it come naturally, or you learned it on the job, or take us through that process?
Well, definitely the organization, which I very much learned on the job. I do remember an important lesson I had early on at KPMG. One of my senior people was, I think, either out sick or for some reason I had to take over and, look after a piece of client work that we were doing. And I remember being like, yes, this is awesome. This is my first year and they've given me this project to look after. And I wouldn't say failed miserably, but I did not do well. I basically, it was too much. I couldn't finish it all. But I didn't tell it, I tried to do this thing on my own. I thought pure, hard work will get me through. I'll put in the hours, but it was not something one person could do. Or, even in combination. I did have some other people, I believe, who were working on it, but it was just too much. So I ended up getting something that I thought, was quite good for a first year grad. Actually, it came out badly in my performance review, and I was like, oh my God,
Yeah.
And then, I reflected on it and I was like, well, yes, I should have communicated. I should have asked for help. I shouldn't have, I think I saw myself as, I don't have any power to kind of do anything as this junior person. I'm just going to do what I've been told. But, it really was quite a good lesson in, just communicate and ask for help.
Right.
Quite easily, we could have better managed that process.
Right. So now you are in KPMG, and the year is?
So this would be 2004, 2005.
Right.
Yeah.
And then how did you move to Singapore, and how did that journey happen?
Well, KPMG, I left shortly after I qualified as a chartered accountant.
Right.
It wasn't really for me it was a lot of audit work, and I wasn't so interested in the audit side. And I did do, I did feed it back to them, and they were amazing. They put me on more consulting work, but I think ultimately I was still looking to get into something else. The work I had done when I was doing the Chevening Scholarship with commercialization of technology got me really interested in, I thought maybe I could work for a venture capital firm.
Right.
So I ended up interviewing for some positions. I think one or two I wasn't successful in. And then my break was working for my old employer, Intertech. I got offered a position in their mergers and acquisitions team. So I was thrilled because I think I wasn't sure if I would be able to jump right into a role like that. But it was amazing. The industry, the testing, inspection, and certification industry, the big players make a lot of acquisitions, depending on the economic environment. A lot of the growth comes through acquisition. Right. So we had a small team of 4 of us, and we were acquiring, I think my first year there, it was something like 18 companies.
Right.
So it was just great experience managing acquisitions from beginning to end. And I had an amazing boss who really became a mentor to me, and who I'm still in contact with, and I still meet up with him in London. So that was really what I felt quite fulfilled doing that type of work versus doing the IT audit and consulting work.
Right. So how did you think about starting your own business consultancy?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I was supposed to tell you how I got to Singapore. Yeah. So that role really, it was always the intention. The mergers and acquisitions team was kind of seen as the future leaders of the company.
Yeah.
And the intention was that you'd spend a few years there and then move out into the business somewhere. So I was moved to Texas to work with the head of commodities, who also became an important mentor to me.
Right.
And I was heading up the financial planning and analysis team over there. And then from there, I did that for maybe about a year and a half or so. And then it was quite a big jump, which I'm grateful to Intertech for giving me. I was then put in charge of Southeast Asia and moved to Singapore.
Right.
So that was back in 2012. And I did that for a couple of years, and my role was changed. Eventually I was given a global role. So I was managing the global cargo assurance business line, which is the downstream oil and gas part of Intertech's business. That was very challenging, and that's where really some conflicts started to come in with family. I had already had my son at that point, so I think he must have been less than 1. And I was determined to be a very present mother, but I was really struggling because the travel was quite demanding. I had a couple of people in Singapore, but the majority were in Texas, UK, Geneva, some in the Middle East. So really the role required a lot of travel. Southeast Asia was a bit more manageable. Everybody's on the same time zone. I could do quick trips, a couple days here, a couple days there. Once I took on the global role, that was no longer possible. So I did that for I think it probably wasn't long before I realized that it wasn't going to work. Yeah. Maybe 6 months or less.
Yeah.
And it was quite sudden that I decided I've got to stop this, really. Yeah. I had been on a trip to London and Geneva, and I took my son along with me. So I did take him on my travel that was extended.
And how old was he?
He was maybe a year or so at that point. so still quite young.
Yeah.
And I was flying my mom around, flying her to Texas, flying her to the UK, Switzerland to look after him.
Yeah.
My mom was getting super burnt out.
Yeah.
And my schedule at the time was just, nonstop.
Yeah.
I would be in meetings all day in London till about 8, get back to the hotel, calls with the US till midnight.
Yeah.
And I remember my mother saying something to me on this trip, like, oh, I think you'd be really happy being a stay-at-home mom. And I kind of looked at her like, are you nuts? I love my job. But then I got back to Singapore after that trip, and it was 3 a.m, and I was on the phone with the US because I thought, I'm awake, my toddler's awake, I might as well sort out some stuff. Yeah. And then I hung up and I was like, I just can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And I mean, I just on the spot, just wrote an email to my boss and to the CEO and said, look, I really, it's very important that I have the time with my family.
Yes.
And, I'll stay however long it takes to make, a smooth transition, but in the long term, I just can't do this. So I ended up, I think after about 6 months, I left Intertech, and my intention, I was really burnt out. I think I looked like a skeleton at that point. And my intention was just to take 6 months to a year off, completely off. But I soon realized I'm not good at not doing anything.
Yeah.
And I was approached by a private equity firm after a couple of weeks to do some work, looking for targets around Asia and working with them on strategy, portfolio strategy. So I really set up the company just to do that piece of work because I thought, I should probably contract as a company.
Right.
So I didn't think it would be, I thought it was just a career break thing, to be honest.
Right.
And then that work kind of turned into, I started working with one of the businesses that was a target that didn't work out. They asked me to do some work with them. Former colleagues asked me to do some work. So it just kind of got to the point where, the years went by and
more power to you.
Yeah.
The story is so amazing.
I would love to say it was all planned, but the truth of it is, it was really just me getting burnt out and then things taking a different direction.
Right. And then you named your company Hadouken.
Yes.
Right. So it's a very intriguing name. And what does it symbolize to you?
Well, it was a bit of an inside joke, to be honest. My son is named Ryu after the character Ryu in Street Fighter, although we spell it R-I-U, not R-Y-U. And Hadouken is his weapon. So it's like a fireball thing that he creates. So it was really just a bit of an inside joke with myself.
Right.
And I even originally had a logo that looked sort of like the Hadouken, which has now been modified. And Hadouken, for all practical purposes, is just a Japanese sounding word that I've picked, not anything to do with the game franchise.
Yes.
But that's really where it came from.
Right. So you come from big giant companies. And you started your own boutique consulting firm. So how do you think your mindset has changed? Has it really changed, or does it really need to change? If yes, then what are the steps and how do you cope with that?
So it was a huge change. I mean, coming from Intertech, the organizational structure is so strong and established. So leading the business, actually, you can focus on more the people side of things, on the investments. You don't have to really think so much about, if an investment makes sense and the board approves it, then the money will come in. I had a very, very good finance person. So I think there's a lot of things that go on in the background that you don't have to think so much about. Whereas, and even working with some of my clients was really eye-opening to me, who, smaller companies. I've worked with startups, I've worked with kind of small SMEs, big SMEs, and a lot of them, private equity owned firms, companies, and they really have to keep an eye on the cash flow.
Right.
So, you really, profit is a bit secondary. Of course, we all want profit, but the cash, we need to make payroll. And I think that's really a mindset shift when you're running your own business. The cash, and which I'm sure you know as well.
Right.
Cash is king. You have to make sure you can pay your suppliers, pay your employees. You have to keep an eye on how you're managing your working capital.
Right.
Also admin.
Yes. Yes.
So, I very quickly realized, oh God, I have to have, I have to come up with a contract template.
Yes.
I have to come up with a proposal template.
Yes.
I think a lot of that is easier now with AI.
Right.
But at the time, I was very much like Googling and struggling a bit. And I would also, at that point, I think I was not reaching out to people as much as I could have either.
Right.
I think it would have been very helpful if I
Right.
reached out to people and said, how do you do this? How do you do that? Instead of, trying to invent the wheel myself.
Right.
And I have since helped other people who are starting up consulting businesses. Here, this is the template I use.
Yes.
You can use this type of contract template.
Right.
I think just simple things like that, payroll, working through tax things, pay slips, employment agreements, all of this stuff has to be put in place. And initially you're not, you're doing all of this yourself.
Right.
In most cases, unless you happen to be someone who can afford to, you have funding and you can set up teams from scratch. But a lot of entrepreneurs are not in that position.
Right. So if you to give one advice to someone who wants to start their own, whether it's a business consultancy or any kind of business for that matter, what would that be?
I would absolutely say reach out to people, reach out to your network. And I think people are getting much better at that because it's also much easier now with LinkedIn. You can search for people in your industry, people who went to your university, people who live in your city. And I do see a lot of the Duke students that I work with. They're already, they already have their own businesses. They already have like such a amazing support network full of professors and people in the industry and other students. I think people are doing that much better now. And it just makes things so easy. I mean, even for me, I've been reaching out to people who, have similar businesses that they've scaled up, just saying, how is this for you? What did you find hard? What do I need to think about that I might be missing?
Right.
And I really wish I would have started that earlier.
Yes. So what is the biggest challenge you faced when you started on your own?
Definitely that, just the admin stuff. I really, for me, I can be too much of a perfectionist, I think, where I feel like everything has to be in place before I go forward. And you cannot do that if you have your own business. Or maybe some people can, I don't know, but you just have to do things. And it's not going to be perfect. And it will take a lot of adjustment and a lot of, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, seeing what people actually need and what they don't need. And, you're not going to necessarily have all the boxes ticked, in terms of all the admin stuff. You just need to do what you need to do and then get things in place as you go. So I think early on I really did try to, I was trying to like set everything up at once and have this like proper functioning business from, before I even started doing much work. And I think that's not the way to approach it really. You end up wasting, things are going to change, know. And you just have to have that in mind from day one.
True, true, true. And you also work with so many students and the university for the admissions. So, what advice would you give, Stacey? For example, there's a student who's studying in grade 11 and she wants to study engineering.
Okay.
Then, what do you think she should do to get into the university that she wants to? And what kind of university that he or she should go to? What is your advice?
Yeah, I think they really need to consider what kind of place they want to go to depending on their interests. So the US is obviously very strong for liberal arts. All through my time at Duke, even after I decided I was going to stick with engineering, I was able to do courses in literature, film, and I probably spent 90% of my time on those courses because I struggled the most. But you can really do a range of stuff. I think the UK is still structured quite focused on the major. So when I was over there, my courses were, other than the business course, they were exclusively engineering.
Right.
And when I did my study abroad, people thought I was really strange because I was doing kind of a mix of engineering and literature and film.
Yeah.
So I don't know how common that is now in the UK. So I think a lot of it is about looking around and seeing what kind of place would suit you, what kind of culture. If you have the resources, go and visit different universities in different countries. And then, in terms of preparing, I think the schools now are very good at preparing kids. Universities like to see people who are well-rounded, who have done, different things, who have worked on interesting projects. But I think ultimately the universities do each have their unique culture. And certainly, the volunteer alumni interviewing, we're really looking to see, are these people good? We don't have access to any of the grades or any of that. We don't ask them about their academics. We ask them, what are you into? What do you like to do when you're not doing academics? What kind of hobbies do you have? And that will really be the basis for, does this person, are they going to add a lot to the university and vice versa? So I think it's a very, there's so many different choices.
Okay. For example, if the student is still in grade 9, then how should they spend their time so that they are preparing themselves for the university, or even how should they decide what course that they want to do?
So if they're that young, I would really advise them to just go with what they're interested in and try a bunch of different things if they're interested in a bunch of different things. I think it can't hurt to try. If you haven't found anything you're super passionate about, that's okay. There's plenty of time to try things. I think it's and I do see a lot of focus on preparation now. And of course it's important to plan, to be in a good position for the next stage of your life. But I think there's also a lot to be said for just doing things for the sake of doing things. Versus, as, okay, I have to tick all these boxes, to make sure that I'm in a good position when I apply to the universities. I think naturally the schools do encourage the right kind of things and give the students the right kind of opportunities. I'm blown away by, this is the schools in Singapore, the kinds of things students are doing and the opportunities the school is giving them to manage projects and to get involved in, different types of volunteer work. So I think a lot of those things will come, and the the key is for the student to be open to the opportunities.
Yeah. Okay. Now, for example, a student doesn't know that, whether they should get into engineering or any other course for that matter. So, what do you think that they should think of while choosing a course? For example, the student is very good at maths.
Yeah.
Maths, they're even good at languages. They're also good at sciences. They're also good at computer science.
Yeah.
Then what are the traits that you think they should have or they should develop in themselves so that they're able to choose a specific thing?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't worry so much about the choosing. I think they can look at a lot of things they're interested in and pursue, those different subjects. Even when you pick a major, or at least for the US universities, you can change it. So, you can initially start out, again, I thought I was going to switch to art history from engineering.
Right.
And it's quite easy to switch early on. You may have to do some catching up. I mean, I had to do a summer course because I took so many arts courses.
Yes.
But it's really possible.
Yeah.
And I think, as you take some of the college level courses, people tend to get a much better idea of what they're interested in, what they're good at. Yeah. A lot of people I know changed majors, added a major, modified a major once they were already at the university. Yeah. So I think there's no need to really be totally fixed on something. Yeah. But if they're in, engineering has so many, I think it is actually a very good place to start. If somebody is good at math and interested in engineering, there's so many different areas of engineering.
Right.
But, that could be said about so many other things as well, political science, economics, different areas of medicine.
Right. So you've created this wonderful workspace, Stacey, for yourself. So when you were creating this, what was in your mind? What kind of space did you want yourself where you could work in peace?
I wanted something that was just pretty simple and natural. Something with a lot of green.
That's so
plants.
Beautiful. Yes.
Lighting has always been very, very important to me. Yeah. For me, there's nothing worse than walking in somewhere and it's like that cold, being in offices. Yeah. I start to feel a bit ill when I'm in that like cold fluorescent lighting too long.
Yes.
And since I do so much of my work from home, I really wanted to have a good, relaxing space.
Yeah. And I think you've achieved that beautifully.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so one last question, Stacey. If you were to give advice to a 20-year-old Stacey today, what would you say?
Oh God, there's so many things I could say. I suppose I would say, really don't hesitate to ask people for help. Because it wasn't until my 20s, I mean, this is super embarrassing, but I even remember the exact moment when it clicked in my head. I think I needed a pencil. I was working on something. I was at UCL with a bunch of the PhD or the postdoc students. And I needed a pencil. Yeah. And I was like very hesitant to ask because, again, I was always shy, did not want to ask for things. Yeah. And then I said, I asked for a pencil and it was so easy. And then something clicked in my brain where I just thought, why do I not ask people for things when I need them? Yeah. And then I kind of went the other direction where I just started asking for things all the time. Yeah. And it made life surprisingly, just so much smoother. Everything becomes a lot easier. You have a lot more meaningful interaction with people that comes from asking for help.
Right.
So I think that is probably the number one thing I would tell a young Stacey, just reach out, ask people for help, or even beyond that, if you're just interested in what a person's doing, just connect with them. And, that's where I think a lot of the magic happens, from meeting people and coming up with things. You really don't know where it'll take you.
Yeah, true. Great. Anything else?
I think that's everything. It was lovely talking to you.
Great. Yes, it was wonderful. It's not only a fun conversation, I think it was a masterclass in turning your dreams into reality.
Excellent.
So, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Stacey.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.